Okay, so this conversation is going to be about the changes on our compensation, where it's listed in the contract, why it's listed the way it is, what it said before, and what it says now, all the things. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen with you. And if you go to page 5 of that red line contract that I just put in the chat for you, this is what it looks like. Okay, so page 5 starts out talking about paragraph 8. Okay. So what it used to say, let me get a highlighter. What it used to say right here is brokers and sales agents. And this is talking about our disclosure. If you guys go back to your pre-licensing days, it talked about if there's a parent, spouse, or child, right here. Parent, spouse, or child, that needs to be disclosed in the contract. Okay. So they've taken that out first. And they've said this is for brokers or sales agent disclosure because there is no such thing as a broker that is a realtor. Brokers are not realtors. Brokers are brokers. Realtors are realtors. There is a distinction. That's why there's a designation. So there should not be an and here. This is for a broker or a sales agent's disclosure. Okay. Along with there being a disclosure here, this is what they took out. Okay. So when you're talking about brokers or sales agents, this is the first place in the contract previously where the obligation on who pays the fee has been placed into the contract. The first place from paragraph 1 all the way down to 23, paragraph 8B used to be the very first place that we discussed who pays the fee. Okay. What it used to say, broker's fees are all obligations of the parties for payment of broker fees are contained in separate written agreements. Think to yourself really hard, what separate written agreements do we have that discuss broker compensation? That would be your buyer representation agreement, and that would be your listing agreement. Those two documents have the information that contain in writing what these fees are and the obligations as to who has to pay them. But this is your first indication. They'll go look at those two documents to figure out who gets this money and how it gets paid. Okay. They have removed this. This is gone. This is not a conversation that we need to have in paragraph 8. So there is no conversation about there is no conversation about compensation anywhere. Now it's gone. Okay. So it's now the first time that you're going to see anything about broker compensation will now be where it should be, which is in paragraph 12B, right here, broker compensation, brokerage compensation. Okay. It should be here because this is where we actually identify who pays and how much. Having it listed in paragraph 8B was actually very unnecessary. It was kind of like double downing on the topic of the fact that there are separate written agreements, but we can all read. So now we've taken that out and we've now just added more details here. Okay. So what I'm going to harp on first is the red. Then I'm going to go into the buyer rep and the listing agreement and how it's supposed to be used. And then I'm going to show you how they've cleaned this up very nicely in blue. Okay, so focus on the red. Let me zoom in a little bit. Expenses. Okay, expenses here. The following expenses must be paid at or prior to closing. Who pays what expenses? The very first person that the paragraph identifies is the seller. Okay, so how you can read this is the following expenses must be paid at or prior to closing by the seller. Okay, so you see how there's an A and then an A1 and then there's a 2. So there's a difference. As soon as you get to number 2, now we're talking about the buyer. Do you guys see that? So I'm showing you how you read the contract. So we're talking about the seller's expenses only. One of the seller expenses was right here, brokerage fees that the seller has agreed to pay. Okay. That is something that the seller right here has to pay when at or prior to closing. That's what this says. Okay. So we have brokerage fees that the seller has agreed to pay. Who agreed to pay them? The seller. When do they have to be paid? At closing or prior to closing. Brokerage fees that the seller agreed to pay. All right. Now, here's how it you used to be broken down. The following amount would be applied to the brokerage fees that the buyer has agreed to pay. That is confusing. The seller is supposed to have agreed to pay for something, and now the buyer is agreeing to pay for something. How they intended for it to be read is that the seller is now paying for the expenses that the buyer agreed to pay. Where was that supposed to be at? The buyer agreed to pay your compensation in the buyer representation agreement. And I will show you that here in a second. So this contract is saying the seller is going to step in for the buyer, and whatever the buyer has agreed to pay that brokerage or whatever that brokerage split is, the seller is saying, scoot over, I got you. Let me pay the tab. That's what's in red. That's what it says. But unless you've had plenty of practice, if you read it the way I just told you, that's just a little confusing. So that's the first thing that they had to change. Now, they also put in here that there is a dollar amount, right? You see this dollar sign? And then there's a percentage, okay? And then it's always of the sales price, check one box and blah, 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 blah. Here we go. And then this is in blue, okay? And then down here, we're talking about brokerage fees that the buyer has agreed to pay. So this is saying the buyer now has expenses that have to be paid, okay? What expenses does the buyer have? Here is a list from here, all of this plus all of these. Okay. So how we've done this before, because again, it's in red, is that the buyer could say, my closing costs in general are loan origination fees, property taxes, my piece of it, the prorated amount between the buyer and the seller, the title company fees, if that's the case, surveys, if that's the case, and all these other things that are listed here that we all can see, and brokerage fees that the buyer agreed to pay. Again, confusing because didn't we discuss what the buyer agreed to pay up here? And now we're talking about it again down here. Do you guys see the repetitiveness and the confusion? Okay. This is why we needed to make the change. If you give this stuff to an attorney, which we have one here on this phone call, she's probably nodding her head right now. An attorney can rip this apart as far as who has to pay what, because it's all over the place right now. Who pays this? Why do we pay that? At what time? Who owes it? Because it's saying that the buyer and the seller pay, right? So and then that is the case, but it's just the way it's written, okay? So what they've done is that they used to say you can use concessions, seller's concessions right here. You can use seller's concessions to pay all of these things that buyers have to pay at closing, prior to or at closing. One of those things were brokerage fees. If you talk to any lender out there, they will tell you, no, you cannot add seller's concessions to pay brokerage fees. No, you cannot. That is not how this works. That is a separate line item. It is not something that can be wrapped into the loan for most cases. And I'll give you an example, veterans, they can wrap their concessions, they can wrap their closing costs into their loan. You cannot wrap broker fees into your loans like that, not on this contract. Can a lender actually do these things? Sure, depending on whatever loan program they have. But that has nothing to do with us as agents. It does not need to be in our contract worded this way. That is a problem. Okay. So we've taken all this stuff out. Okay. So now the question is who pays what and why do they have to pay it? Okay. So let's go look at the buyer representation agreement and let's discuss what this is looking like. Okay. Now this is what these documents look like today. And I will show you what it's about to look like in June when this gets all cleared up. Now, the buyer representation agreement will not change. The buyer rep is not going to change. It's going to be the listing agreement that changes. Okay, so this is going to stay as is. When you have a broker fee, how you should be relating this conversation to your buyers. You, as a buyer, are going under contract. Okay, this is a buyer and tenant representation agreement. This is a contract. You are agreeing to everything that is listed here. You are agreeing to this stuff. This is a contract. In this contract, I am discussing with you how much money I'm going to be paid. Somebody is going to pay this broker fee. Somebody, okay? Somebody's going to pay it. How it gets paid is listed here. And I need you to understand this very carefully. It clearly states that we will seek to obtain the payment that we're talking about, which is listed up here in this box, from the seller, the landlord, or their agent. We're going to look for that first. Okay, I'm going to first go and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mr. Landlord, Mr. and Mr. Listing Agent, Mr. and Mrs. Broker on the listing side. I need whatever amount of money I put in this box. Send that to my broker, sign the check, put it in workspace, dot it, cross your T's, done. That's what this is saying. What if somebody says no? If they say, no, I'm not paying you 4%. No, I'm not paying you half a first month's rent. I will pay you 25% of first month's rent. I will pay you 2.5% of the sales price. The contract, with this is a contract. The contract states very clear, I'm highlighted in pink. It's bolded and it's underlined. If such parties refuse or fail to pay the broker, the full amount that you've listed right here or right here, the client, what client? The client that's signing this contract, not the seller, not the listing agent, your buyer is the client that is signing this contract, will pay. Let me highlight that a few times. Not might pay, not I hope they pay. No, no, no. You will pay. Strong attorney language. Jasmine, your broker, I'm sending the invoice to your buyer for the remaining amount, period. I want all of the funds that are due per the contract that you signed. Do you see what I'm saying? They will pay the amount that is due or the amount that's reduced. If we only get a portion of it, whatever, they will pay it. Okay. Now, super scary language because who in the world in their right mind actually has a buyer pay their fee or a tenant pay their fee? They don't. It doesn't happen. I've never had a buyer have to pay me like ever. I've never had a tenant pay me ever, ever. Like I've never had to do it. The seller or the listing agent always pay. That is my job, your job to negotiate that for yourself. Mm, boom. Fully negotiable. You have to negotiate. Do not call me, Jasmine. They're not giving me my 4%, my 3%, my first month's rent. What do I do? What did you negotiate? You. I am signing whatever invoice that matches your contract. That's why your contracts are required to be uploaded. I'm looking to see that the numbers match. Okay. So if you did not negotiate your fee, then do not look to me to help you get it later. You have to negotiate that at the beginning. Okay. So you are fully negotiating with your buyer, with your tenant. I am going to be paid this percent when you buy, this percent when you lease. I'm going to help you out though. I'm going to seek that payment from these people first, but homie, understand me. If they don't pay, you will be paying me. That's what this says. You will. Okay, you will. Now, on the seller side, let's go to the seller side. This is what's changing. Actually, I'm sorry. This is also changing. Hold on. Where it says, or their agents. There won't be, or their agents, nothing. The seller or the landlord will pay. I will first seek the payment from the seller or the landlord. This right here, or their agents, that's about to be cut. Let me show you where. Now, on this side, this whole section right here, this is about to get cut. This is about to go away. There is no listing agent paying, listing broker paying me, your buyer broker, there, or me as the listing broker for you guys paying the, I'm not writing checks to any brokerages anymore after this. Once this is done, this is done. This is going away. The payment comes from the seller or the landlord forever from this point moving forward. That's just what it is. So when you sign a listing agreement, I've been telling you guys for a while now, focus on this paragraph right here. All your listing agreements need to be about the compensation without compensating the other broker. We just need to worry about your fee, just yours. We don't need to worry about anything else but your fee. Okay. Now, if the listing side is only paid with their fee only, and the buying side is supposed to be looking at the seller or the landlord to pay the buying fee. If not, then the buyer has to pay it. Now you understand when we go over here, and now we're looking at all the new stuff. So let me get rid of all this yellow so I can show you the new stuff, what they've changed here. Okay. The change is coming right down here. So what they're doing now is they're saying brokerage compensation in total. Right here, brokerage compensation. The brokerage compensation is not set by law, so they're giving you a disclosure and all these things. And just like in paragraph 8B before, where it said there should be some type of other agreement or whatever, they're kind of touching on that here. So it says here that the brokerage compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable, which we see that in our buyer and listing agreement. Each party shall pay. Ooh, look at this. Each party shall pay their respective brokers pursuant to the terms of the party's obligation to compensate their brokers contained in separate written agreements. Ooh, just makes my back hurt. So, the separate written agreement part, this is what we took away from paragraph 8. Do you guys see that? Separate written agreements. When we didn't need this up here. So we dropped this down here. And this is saying each party shall pay their respective broker. So buyer, pay your broker because that's what you put right here in this buyer rep agreement. Listing side, sellers, pay your brokers because that's what you put right here in the listing agreement. Okay. Pursuant to the terms of the parties' obligations to compensate their brokers contained in separate written agreements. Look at this bolded part. The contributions under 12B1 and 12B2 shall be applied to and shall not change the parties' obligations to pay compensation pursuant to those agreements. Okay. The following contributions must be made at closing. Look at this. Seller will pay toward the brokerage compensation owed by buyer to buyer's broker. Buyer will pay dollar amount or percentage to be applied toward the brokerage compensation owed by seller to seller's broker. If there is a agreement of any kind where the seller is going to in fact pay now this buyer broker, this is where we put it. Specifically, how much? Now, how much does the seller pay the listing broker? That does not need to be talked about here because that is talked about here in the listing agreement, as always. There hasn't ever been a spot in the contract where the seller's contribution to the listing broker is actually listed here in the contract because we have a listing agreement that discusses that. We are good. The problem is on the buying side, the buyer's broker is supposed to first seek the payment from the seller and the landlord, right? So if in negotiations, I will buy 123 Easy Street for $500,000 and for the seller to pay my broker 3% of that, I need to discuss that here. Okay, because it specifically says seller will pay whatever percent, whatever dollar amount to be applied right here, to be applied towards the broker's compensation owed by the buyer's broker. Why is it owed? It's owed because it's over here. It's owed here that the buyer will pay this percent for the lease and this percent for purchases. But I'm first seeking it from the seller. The seller here is agreeing I will pay this amount towards that fee. So it's the same thing as it always has been. But this is where the problem is that now it's so black and white and clear as day in the contract. If your clients are doing what you should be advising that they do, which is read the contract I'm having you sign for your offer. If they actually read this, where it's going to scare everybody is right here, where it specifically says that the buyer will pay some type of amount towards broker compensation owed to the seller's broker. Wait a minute. So buyers can pay their brokers all of a sudden. There are so many people out there who forget that the buyer's agent compensation is and has always been since the beginning of time negotiable. It's never been the seller has to pay. It has never been like that. It has always been negotiable. That lawsuit of June 2024 put into practice the current contract we have that we've marked out in red. We are making it even clearer now because there's been lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit for the past couple of years trying to figure out who actually has to pay this money. So they're changing the wording. So when you come across this and your clients say, wait a minute, the buyer can contribute, you need to be very clear and firm on the buyer agent standpoint. My buyer ain't got no money. We ain't got none. We ain't got none. Just because you see this new fancy paragraph did not change the fact that my client doesn't have 3% of $500,000. She ain't got it. He ain't got it. We need you to take it out of your proceeds, just like you would have before this contract changed. So let's go ahead and click that on paragraph 12B1. Seller to pay, seller will pay whatever percent of the sales price to be applied to the broker compensation. Now, why in the world, where I have it highlighted, I see your comments, Nishan. Why in the world would the buyer ever pay anything towards the listing broker's compensation? Why would they do that? Investors do that all the time. I'm going to offer you 70% of your list price. But guess what? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you don't have to pay your listing broker. I got it. I'm going to pay your listing broker. I'm going to pay all your closing costs, all of them, but I'm only going to give you 70% of the value of your home. It happens all the time. I'm in the middle of one of those right now. The seller is not paying my fee, the buyer is, because the buyer is an investor. So that's why you would use the highlighted one down here at the bottom. Let me erase this so that there's no confusion. This highlighted part right here, why in the world would a buyer ever offer to pay the listing fee? Most of the time, I'm not telling you all the time. I'm not saying this is a fail-proof system. I'm saying most of the time. When there's an investor involved, investors will come unrepresented for themselves and they will offer to pay the listing broker's fee. So that's why there is a spot that says buyer will pay percent or dollar amount of the sales price to be applied toward the brokerage compensation owed by the seller to seller's broker. I'm going to pay your listing fee as a buyer because I'm not giving you a full amount for your offer anyway. Most of the time it's an investor that's doing this. Is it possible that it will be an everyday buyer? Sure. If that buyer's got bukus of money and they're like, I'm trying to sweeten this deal, I'll pay both agent compensation, mine and yours. Let's go. Let's do it. Like you can add that in here. Like I'm going to take care of it. So that would mean, again, I'm leaving the first box blank and I'm going to follow my buy rep agreement. If they fail to pay, or if they do not pay all, then my buyer is going to pay me. So my buyer can pay me and the buyer can pay the listing side if they want. It's whatever you negotiate. I just wanted to be very clear here with you guys how negotiable this really is. And when your clients are now going to be able to read what this is in blue, it's going to flip people out, especially the sellers, because they're going to say to themselves, oh, I don't have to pay. I don't have to pay anybody. The buyer can pay for my person and the buyer can pay for themselves. And then the buyer people are going to look at it and be like, wait a minute. I have to pay this stuff. Like it is a fully negotiable thing, and it always has been, but we're just extra highlighting it here with this new wording. This is fully negotiable. Stop telling your clients, you will not have to pay my fee. There is a situation where they actually could. You have to be willing to sign the amendment later to take less money. You have to be willing to if you put your neck on the line like that, be willing to work for free. Because what if the property that they absolutely said is my deal breaking property, I have to have it? What if they're not paying your fee and your buyer can't pay it either? Now you're going against old car if you don't take them to see that house. I mean, this can get really ugly, so I want to make sure that you are fully aware of it now.